Good morning. This is the last morning I am going to be waking you up, unless you begin the morning with my podcast, Highly Concentrated Hugh, because beginning Monday, I am going to move to the 3 to 6 p.m. live East Coast afternoon drive slot so I can return to talking to the West Coast as well. Dr. Gorka is going back into the White House with Donald Trump. I am moving into the afternoon slot, which I freely admit I have long coveted and have long looked forward to close the end of the day and look back at what's happened. But I want to begin this last morning show by thanking Dwayne and Adam and Harley, who have been here every day in the middle of the night working the vampire shift in California from, 1 o'clock in the morning till we wrap up the show at 6 a.m. out on the West Coast. And then we broadcast at different times during the day, but we do often open up the morning for people. And I appreciate that I've done that for you, and I thank you for giving us a listen. I thank that trio, plus Ben Brigman, who was the first Harley, for just being here every day to help me deliver this product. Now, I'm saddened by the fact that my last week in California has been a mixture of grief and anger and a lot of misinformation from a lot of ignorant people. Now, there's a difference between stupidity and ignorance. Stupid people don't have the capacity to know what they don't know, and so they ramble on and they talk. Ignorant people presume to speak to a subject matter, these fires are on the table here, without knowing anything about it. And there are lots of people in between, the totally ignorant and the totally stupid. I actually know a lot about California land use law, fire prevention, fuel load, water conservation. I know a lot about that stuff. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about it this hour so that you have a little bit of background. But I do not need any more lectures on people about climate change and everything that Donald Trump is saying that is wrong. No, Donald Trump is exactly right. He has been dogging Governor Newsom, for 8 years about fuel management in the coastal sage scrub areas of California and about water conservation, about the Delta smelt, dogging him. And Gavin has been blissfully indifferent for 6 years. Before that, Jerry Brown was indifferent for 8 years. So we're suffering a lot of consequences out here. And I see people blithely saying, can't we talk about climate change? Jim Sciutto and I like Jim. Jim's a friend, CNN anchor. We were online yesterday and well, can't we talk about climate change? I said, no, they got nothing to do with climate change. It's got nothing to do with climate change. 100-mile-an-hour Santa Ana winds are not new. They are not new. We've gone through them many, many times. This morning, the wind is picking up. I don't think we're going to get anywhere like we got earlier in the week, but it's picking up. The air is terrible. My eyes are full of the sort of flotsam and jetsam of the fires, but I'm 55 miles south of the Palisades, a little bit further away from the Pasadena fire, the Eaton fire. I want to read to you a little bit that appeared yesterday. In 2014, California passed a bond measure to finally do something about capturing rain and snowpack runoff before it blends into the Pacific Ocean, becoming useless both as drinking water and fire defense. Prop 1 passed overwhelmingly. Voters paid $7.5 billion, at least theoretically, to make it happen. Gavin Newsom has been the governor of California for the past 6 of these 10 years. Would you like to take a stab at how many of the new state reservoir or water capture systems have been completed? You're absolutely right. 0. Quadrillions of gallons of fresh water have been lost or worse, intentionally pumped into the ocean. Insurance companies pulled out of the LA basin years ago. That's a little bit of an overstatement. A lot of insurance companies pulled out of a lot of areas in the LA basin, those that butted up against open space areas that were not appropriately cleared of brush, and they asked for a premium increase to spread the risk of what would be inevitably a destructive, damaging inferno, such as we have seen, and they just refused to reinsure after the California regulators said, no, we won't let you charge that. And guess what? You can't make people be in the insurance business. You can't make someone insure a house. So they left. A lot of people leave California because nothing works here. That happened now. We have thousands of people, no home insurance, among the 10,000 people who have lost home and businesses. Now, mostly that's in the Palisades, the very, very rich area. But just because people are house rich, don't assume that they're going to be able to walk away without penury. John Podhoretz, commenting on this on the commentary podcast yesterday, said many people will be reduced to penury as a result of this catastrophe. And John is absolutely right. If you know anything about this, there are a lot of stars, and you will get a lot of attention to the stars who have lost their homes. And the list is going to grow. And I have sympathy for each of these people. I would not want my house to burn down. It is such a nightmare. So when you hear that Tom Hanks lost his house, and Steven Spielberg lost his house, and Miley Cyrus, Ben Affleck, Jamie Lee Curtis, Anthony Hopkins, Billy Crystal, John Goodman, James Woods, Maria Shriver, that's Arnold's old home. The list is long. Eugene Levy, I could go on for a long. Many, many, many people with a lot of money lost their homes. Many people with no money lost their homes. But they're in the Palisades for a reason. Their parents or their grandparents moved there decades ago, and they have a house on which there is no mortgage, and about or for which no insurance might have been available, and they are absolutely screwed. What I really want people to understand is this was all preventable. The Santa Ana winds are predictable. The necessity of having high water pressure in the elevated areas close to the coastal sage scrub of the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy is necessary. Malibu has burned before, but fires have always been contained because there's always been a plan. The fire season now goes longer when it doesn't begin to rain in December. It's kind of elementary that you should know this, that when there is no rain, and there hadn't been any rain. We had floods of rain last year. Floods of rain. It was the wettest year I've ever spent in California. I've been here in the winter since 1989. I lived here year-round from 1989 to 2016. Now I live in the Beltway, except when I teach, which is in the winter, January through March, a little bit of April. So I've been here every winter since 1989. Before that, I lived in 78, 79, and 80 out here. I know California in my bones. I have been a land use lawyer forever. This did not have to happen. I'm going to explain that to you this hour. Now, what I quoted to you was Dwayne's article for Hot Air, which our friends over at the Powerline blog quoted from extensively. Dwayne might not be much of a producer. In fact, he's not a producer, but he's a very good writer. And I would recommend that you go and read what he has compiled. He actually went and look. I'm just too sad. I know what happened here. I used to do this when I practiced law from 1989 to 2016. My practice generally involved appearing before federal, state, and local officials, asking them for the permission and the permits necessary to move forward with building houses and buildings. I'm a land use development lawyer, retired, and I teach constitutional law. The latter makes me acutely aware of the Fifth Amendment of the United States having to do with property rights, and it makes me acutely aware of much of the absurdity of the regulation that has gone on unchecked for decades, why I occasionally write pieces about how I hope the new Supreme Court steps in, revives Fifth Amendment rights, and begins to strike down the petty bureaucrats of the local planning commission, the California Department of Fish and Game, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Army Corps of Engineers, Region 9 of the EPA, the dreaded California Coastal Commission, which is I'm going to tell you a little bit about that in the third segment of today's program, what these poor people have to come up against. But I do want you to hear, before we get going, in the next segment, I have a tape of one woman of one of the 10,000 homes and businesses that have been destroyed, trying to communicate what has happened to her life. And the sorrow level is so extraordinary that I'll play that for you in the next segment. I want to read to you, though, a 6-year-old in the embers of his house, clutching 2 stuffed toys. A lot of stuff I love is gone. He didn't cry. They're just so deeply sad. It was so special to me, it's going to make me a little sad. I don't know why, but this is what happened to our house. And a lot of the stuff that I love is gone, and now everything is broken, and it's all lost its color and stuff. And these are the only things I have. And he has 2 small toys. Henry is his name. Henry is a great representative because he's not really young enough, he's not really old enough to understand the financial side of this, but he understands the emotional side of it completely. It is a catastrophe for thousands and thousands of our fellow citizens. many of them, because they live in the Palisades, are not ever going to agree with me on anything. And we have to stop. And there is a great deal of temptation to go from anger to blame. We need accountability. We don't need to be angry, and we don't need to look past the suffering of these people who are so deeply injured in the Palisades, in Pasadena, in Sylmar, in Altadena. More on this on the sad last morning of the Hugh Hewitt Show in this time space. Glory days is what I always think of when the presidents get together. The President Club convened yesterday for the burial and memorial service of Jimmy Carter, and lots of people. It's not good to talk smack about people who die, so I'm not going to discuss his presidency. What I liked the most was, well, I told Martha McCollum what I liked the most yesterday. I was doing some commentary with Martha on Fox. Let's go to that. Cut number 14. Yesterday, I'm talking to Martha McCollum about the funeral. Cut number 14. It wouldn't be a morning show unless of the glitch, and I'm not sure that we've got even our towers up, because last I looked last night when I was watching Notre Dame pull out a magic win over Penn State. My gosh, what a heartbreaker for the Nittany Lions last night. They were climbing the hills, and I was wondering whether we'd be broadcasting this morning, because the mothership out here, KRLA, its tower, I think, is up there near the observatory, but we're missing that clip. So I'm going to go to the clip instead of the lady who lost everything. All right, cut number 25. This is a good summation of what's happened 10,000 times to, who knows, 100,000 people. Let's roll this.
This is your house?
This is my house. This one right here. We moved in 26 years ago. And we did the floors, and we put in windows and doors and painted, and just put, my grandchildren loved it. My son and my daughter-in-law, my family, we hosted Christmas Eve and Christmas Day here, and everybody was here. My little house that I loved. My husband just had his 4th cancer surgery. I poured everything into it. My nephew.
I'm so sorry.
I know.
I really am. I don't even know what to say.
That's okay. I don't even know what I'm doing. I'm just. We haven't been sleeping. We haven't slept. We're staying at a hotel. We have nowhere to go. We don't know what we're doing. We were close.
This is a tiny slice of reality for people, which is why I'm slow to condemn anyone about anything that they say. But I don't want people from the East Coast to tell the people on the West Coast what happened. We actually know what happened out here. We are burdened by the worst set of state and local governments and regulators that you could possibly have. None of this had to happen. None of it, N-O-N-E. And there is anger, there is a lot of ignorance, but there will be accountability. Gavin Newsom running for president, that's over. Kamala Harris running for governor, go right ahead. I do believe that we have reached a tipping point in California when 3 neighborhoods, and they are very different neighborhoods, and I know Pasadena a little bit, I know the Palisades a little bit more, and I know Sylmar, Altadena perhaps the most. I've driven through that the most. I am an Orange County guy, not an LA County guy, but I did the news and the nightly television news for PBS for 10 years in Los Angeles. So I've been all over all of these neighborhoods, and I know everything that goes on. And as a land use lawyer, I know the government's getting in the way of people protecting their property. And I know the morons who run the environmental agencies that don't want you to do things like clear coastal sage scrub. And I know that some of the coastal sage scrub that burn, people are telling me it didn't belong to the homeowners. Homeowners couldn't do anything. No, that's not the point. Homeowners aren't even allowed to clear their own land, much less walk into the public land adjacent to them and clear it. They're not allowed to do that. That's up to the government. The government takes over all this land, all the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, all of the valleys, all the canyons. It all belongs to a state or a local or a federal government, and if it burns, it's because those governments failed. And I tell you, and I'm going to tell you about it in the next segment, when they come back and deal with the Coastal Commission, some people's opinions are going to change. It is my last AM Drive You to Work show. I will be moving to the afternoons on Monday. Chris DeGaulle will be behind the microphone come Monday morning. I hope you will greet Chris. You will enjoy him. He brings great energy, information, wit, and good humor. Energy is what you need in the morning. I want to give you a little seminar right now. I have been reading a classic book. It is Frederick Paxson's History of the American Frontier. And it charts how has America settled between the years 1783 and 1893. So for about 110 years, what went on as the frontier. And it begins actually with Ohio, which is the 17th state, and the first state that needed to be enabled to join the Union after the Revolution, which it did in 1803. Congress passed a statute saying, okay, you need to have a constitutional convention. They met in Chillicothe. They got it done. Happened for every state thereafter. Congress controlled the terms and conditions under which the states joined. We have a federal system, 3 tiers of government, federal, state, and local government. But we also have an administrative government that ought not to exist. But the deal with the original settlement of the continent, the American frontier, is you took an axe and a wagon and you went and you claimed land. And genuinely, it was the greatest bargain in the history of mankind. You went out and you got your quarter acre or whatever it was that whichever Homestead Act you were operating under or whatever sale of Virginia property of the Northwest Territories occurred early on. You got your property, you cleared it, you defended it. Sometimes you died doing that. Sometimes you were destroyed by native tribes that felt you were encroaching on their land. Sometimes it was a peaceful settlement. Lots of people moved, and we kept moving for 100 years. There was a frontier for 110 years, really. And in between, the gold rush happened. People came from the west. People came from the south. They all moved out, and they went into the frontier. And the old way, there was no permit development plan. There was no desk at local city hall. But after 1921 or 23, City of Euclid, Village of Euclid versus Ambler, Supreme Court case, upheld zoning. And zoning, once it was upheld, was an impingement on the Fifth Amendment that I don't think ought to have ever been imposed. Houston doesn't have any zoning. Houston's fine. Zoning is a way to give people who have no investment in your life authority over your life by telling you what you can and cannot build on property that you own. But that's the way that's pathway evolution. One step leads to another step. And from that 100-year-ago decision, we now have a regulatory structure that is nightmarish. Nowhere more so than in California. Because you go to the local authority, and they have to work with regional authorities like the Air Quality Management District. And most importantly, for the purposes of building a house, you need to deal with the Regional Water Quality Control Board. And you have to make sure that you aren't upsetting the California Department of Fish and Game or that you're not violating a regulation of the United States Environmental Protection Agency. And if you happen to be impacting anything that appears to be a dry bed of a stream, if it looks like water might collect there, if you have a 100-year storm event, you need to get a permit from the Army Corps of Engineers and maybe other people. But the very seventh circle of regulatory hell, and it's where all the people in the Pacific Palisades have been sent, is the California Coastal Commission. In 1972, right at the height of California becoming the land of fruits and nuts, California did something that seems kind of normal to people. We decided to protect the coast of California. I was not a resident then. I did not vote in California elections until 1978. But in 1972, California passed the Coastal Protection Act and established the California Coastal Commission. $10 to every idiot posting about what went wrong who doesn't know anything about the California Coastal Commission. I'm bankrupt, if that's a binding contract. Because no one seems to know. It's 12 people. There are 3 non-voting members, so there are 12 voting members. It is a permanent bureaucracy. It is a permanent, unregulated, absolutely arbitrary, absolute authority over your property. When is a coastal development permit required? I printed this off this morning from the Coastal Commission's website. And by the way, any place that has offices for the North Coast in Arcata, California, for the North Central Coast in San Francisco, for the Central Coast in Santa Cruz, for the South Central Coast in Ventura, for the South Coast in Long Beach, for the San Diego coast in San Diego, and for the energy and ocean. These are just the offices. They're physical offices. They go everywhere, by the way. What do you need to do for a coastal development permit? All right, I just want to read this to you. This is what's ahead. for every single home builder and homeowner in the Palisades. Generally, any development activity in the coastal zone requires a coastal development permit from the Coastal Commission or local government with a certified LCP, local coastal plan. The width of the coastal zone varies, but it can extend up to 5 miles inland from the shore, including private and public property, and 3 miles out to sea. Development is broadly defined by the Coastal Act. Examples of development include, but are not limited to, demolition, construction, replacement, or changes to the size of a structure, grading, removal, or placement of rock, soil, or other materials, clearing of vegetation in or that provides sensitive habitat, impeding access to the beach or the public recreational trails, altering property lines, such as through a lot line adjustment or a subdivision, changing the intensity of the use of land, such as using a single-family home as a commercial wedding venue. I mean, this is kind of insane, but this is what their website said. Repair or maintenance activity that could result in environmental impacts. Certain activities may be exempt from permit requirements. A few examples of the types of development that are generally exempt are listed below. Some improvement, doesn't tell you what, to existing legal structures that do not pose an environmental risk and are not located adjacent to areas with certain sensitive coastal resources or between the shore and the first public road. That means everybody in Malibu and a lot of people in Palisades. Replacement in kind of most legal structures destroyed by certain disaster, provided it meets certain criteria. Certain repair and maintenance activities, some temporary events that meet certain requirements, installation, testing, placement, and certain. Do you realize what that all is? That is no certainty, all ambiguity, vesting all authority in unelected bureaucrats about whom you have no recourse except to sue in state and federal courts at great expense forever. I do not know if they have an LCP that is going to bind the Coastal Commission and keep them out of the Palisades, but I do know the size of the devastation there will result in a decade of planning and a morass of red tape because California can't get out of its way. So what I heard yesterday, as people began to realize it's not just the rich and the famous, it's a lot of middle class and a lot of lower class and a lot of people who don't have much at all in some of the neighborhoods. We lost an engineer. We didn't lose an engineer, thank God. One of the engineers at KRLA lost their home, I think probably in Altadena, pretty close to where the mothership is in Glendale. I have friends in Pasadena. I don't know how they're doing. I have friends in near the Palisades, one canyon over. We think their home is not destroyed. People are living in hotels. The hotels are completely... The vastness of this disaster is only glimpsed on anywhere not in California. 24/7, the Southern California television stations are carrying different bits of information. 24/7, you're able to watch it. And I have been transfixed by this because in my head, I'm thinking of all of the people that you don't see. I played for you the lady who's so distraught. That is going on all over California, all over Southern California right now. And the pathway forward for them is simply so arduous and so uphill and into the teeth of a bureaucracy that does not care because it is not elected. It does not have to worry about getting fired. There were 3 schools and 1 high school destroyed or damaged in large part in the Pacific Palisades. There was a synagogue burned down in Pasadena. There are structures that held businesses that took years to get off the ground. There are restaurants that are destroyed that have been serving the community forever. It's nothing like anything I've ever seen in America. I have seen it in the tsunami when it hit Sri Lanka and the beachfront was gone, but not in the United States. And we don't think it can happen in the United States because it ought not to happen in the United States because we are the richest country in the world, and California has an enormous budget, and it has plenty of resources, and it has an ocean that it can use desalination if we hadn't spent all the money on the idiotic train to nowhere in the Central Valley. We ought to have plenty of reservoirs. We spent $7.5 billion for reservoir construction 10 years ago, and not one reservoir has been built. Do you know why the Domenech Reservoir, which is no longer called the Domenech Reservoir, took 25 years for the Metropolitan Water District? Because of the Stevens kangaroo rat, because of the iron gridlock of the California Department of Fish and Game, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Riverside County Habitat Conservation Agency, private landowners, public landowners, all sorts of, quote, stakeholders who were not stakeholders, all the environmental wackos, and there are a lot of them out here in California, all stopping the construction of one reservoir. I'm surprised anyone even tries. And I would not take, after my first year of doing it, I would not accept a client who wanted me to go get a coastal development permit because I cannot do the impossible. I batted pretty close to 700 on permits. I'm pretty good at this. I know my way around the permitting world. I'm retired. I'm not doing that anymore. Thank God. They put my kids through college, all these bureaucrats, because I'm not cheap. I was a very, very expensive lawyer, and I worked for the largest developers in America, trying to build a lot of homes at once so they could bring to bear the kind of resources. I have no idea what a mom and pop who's lived in a house for 35 years, and they might be in the entertainment business. They might be very, very famous. They have no idea what is coming. They have no idea what is going to plague them as they attempt to rebuild. It begins with an insurance company, if they even have insurance, because the regulators in California, who are not responsible to anyone, no one, they can't be fired. It's like the federal employment. And here is my pitch to the Republican Congress. Do the right thing and pass a preempting act. Preempt. Use the constitutional authority you have under the spending clause to say, California, you're not getting any money unless you suspend the operation of the California Coastal Commission for 5 years, unless you suspend the operation of the Regional Water Quality Control Boards and the California Air Resources Board, and unless you suspend the activity, unless you issue a permit immediately to every one of these homeowners to build back exactly what they had or more or better as soon as possible. And we're preempting it. I would also like the Republican Congress to consider the repeal of the Endangered Species Act and the blanket, almost complete repeal of the Clean Water Act for a period of 5 years in California. Because these morons will stop the rebuilding that has got to go on. And I say morons because there are a lot of people who work for these bureaucracies who cannot spell cat. And I know that because I work with them for 30 years. There are a lot of smart people, and they're not particularly motivated folks. The good ones leave. They can't stand it. They really can't stand it. People who were there when I started, who were federal employees, they got to retire under the old system after 30 years. They are gone. All ideologues now. I'm in Studio West. I am 50 miles from the grimmest place on America's map, which is Los Angeles County and the city of Los Angeles, the city of Pasadena. And last night there were some fires breaking out in the Woodland Hills. One man was arrested for starting it. Homeless man, 30 years old. We have his arrest on tape. The winds have picked up a little bit, but they're supposed to decline over the weekend. I pray that they do. Let me give you one bit of good news to go with all this devastation, which inevitably impacts everyone who lives all the year or from any part of their time in California. People are pretty sad. It's grim. It's really grim. But there was one bit of news on the international stage yesterday I wanted to call to your attention. Lebanon has basically been a failed state since Hezbollah took over the south and decided to be the cat's paw of Iran in the, quote, axis of resistance. Well, Israel reduced Hezbollah to a smoking ruin over the course of the last 15 months. And the good news of that is the consequence is that Lebanon, which was dysfunctional, they could not even agree. They have a process where legislators elect a president. They could not agree on a president. Now, Lebanon used to be, until the beginning of the Civil War 30 years ago, a very the Riviera of the Middle East. It was a beautiful place, multicultural, held together by post-World War II agreements as to the representation of the Sunni Muslims, the Shiite Muslims, the Druze, the Christian Maronites. Everyone got along. It was Paris in the Middle East. And then that all fell apart in a couple of civil wars. And then Hezbollah moved in, and Iran has no interest. And Syria has been blowing people up. Yesterday, Lebanon's lawmakers elected Joseph Aoun as their president. Now, they haven't had a president for 2 years because no one could agree because Hezbollah would not let anyone in. And by picking them, it represents, he's the head of the army, he's a moderate, and it represents the return of Lebanese sovereignty. the exile of Hezbollah from its checkmate position, and possibly the rebuilding of Lebanon. That country has been on the tortured path of, I wouldn't wish what happened there or Somalia on any country, but it was a corner turned yesterday. That's the good news. The bad news is our political class is so deeply divided between common sense people and ideologues on the left. And I mean, there are some center left people who have common sense. There are not many of them in the Biden administration. There are none of them in California. There's Angus King. There's Jack Reed, two senators from Maine and Rhode Island, respectively. I think John Fetterman is becoming a common sense liberal, kind of old school liberal, Jack Kennedy liberal. So maybe there are shoots and leaves that will come out of this. But in California, are we at a tipping point? That's what the commentary podcast talked about. I don't know. It will be, it is the worst sort of, the grief is so immense and the anger is beginning to boil. And Karen Bass just is not very talented. She couldn't come up with anything to say. Gavin Newsom was absolutely revealed as the emperor with no clothes by one of the victims of the fire approaching him. And I'm sure you have seen the video. I may play it for you next hour, where she approaches the governor who pretends to be talking to the president of the United States, lies to her. Oh, I can't get reception. But he doesn't want to talk to people. This is not, it's not comfortable for him because we passed a bond issue to build the reservoirs to allow the water pressure to be there when the trucks got there. And he vetoed a law that would have allowed the firefighters to work. And Karen Bass took $17 million away from the Los Angeles Fire Department. We are governed by left-wing progressive ideologues. They can be very smart, very winsome. They don't know about people's lives. They inherited this amazing state. Pete Wilson left a perfectly working state when he left the governorship 16, 18, 20 years ago. When did Pete leave? I'm not sure. But when Pete left, that was like the door closing on sanity in California. And because of redistricting, no one ever talks about this, and because it's perfectly legit, it's legal for Democrats to redistrict in Democrats, and term limits combined to give us the dumbest set of ideologues in Sacramento. And I guarantee you will not see one impressive person from the state legislature come out and explain what they're going to do next. Because if there was one such person, if the governor was going to use the emergency powers that are gifted him by the California Constitution, he would have declared yesterday that the Coastal Commission, every local agency, they're all off. He would have done what Josh Shapiro did when the freeway fell down in Philadelphia, what Pete Wilson did when the 10 fell down. Extraordinary circumstances, in earthquakes and in fire. Extraordinary circumstances, I'm invoking extraordinary power. Nobody decides anything but me and my staff. Everybody rebuild as quickly as possible. Every contractor in America, come here. We're going to give you a subsidy. We're going to give you permits. We're going to rebuild. He would have given people hope, but he's not giving people hope because he knows he cannot mess with the California public employee unions or the bureaucracies or the environmental wackos or the left-wing fringe that runs this state. And the great tragedy is it didn't happen. And the second tragedy is it's not going to be fixed because of the same people that let it happen. That's the reality of California today. And we're not going to be able to change until Rick Caruso runs for governor in 2 years. And Rick, get it in gear and get going because everybody wants a governor who actually gets stuff done. This is my last Friday in the mornings. I'm moving to the afternoons next week. And what a grim week it has been. Not since 9/11 has anything this horrific actually happened to this many people in the United States. And I'm 50 miles south of it, so I might be a little bit too close. But Ben Domenech is still in the Beltway, and he joins me every Friday. Ben, ordinarily, good morning. I'd be talking to you about one big bill or two. I'd be talking about the Carter funeral, everything that Donald Trump and I talked about on Monday. But Tuesday came along, and now we have a catastrophe, the likes of which I haven't seen since 9/11. I've never seen in California. What do you make of all this? I know too much. I know too much about land use. I've been practicing law out here for 27 years. I just know too much to have the right amount of perspective. What do you make of this catastrophe?
Well, one of the things that, and first off, Hugh, thank you. It's been such a joy, joining you in the mornings over the last, period of time. I think we've been doing this for a year and a half, I think,
Yep.
something like that. And it's always a pleasure. And good luck in your new slot. You are obviously much closer to this, and so you have the perspective of someone who is close. You know, one of the things that we do in America, and we've done, I think, to our detriment for quite a while, is we nationalize everything. We turn things that are essentially local issues or should be handled locally by the people closest to the problem into big national subjects, and that inevitably happens in the broad and flat media landscape that we have here today, where everybody can have an opinion. My parents, I think, as you know, are both foresters. Their background is in forestry, and everything that they learned from their days working in that field, you know, informs the perspective that says that clearing underbrush has become something that's far more controversial, particularly among the environmental community, than it ought to be, because you have to make choices and there have to be trade-offs. And while you have, you know, the attitudes of people who think that nature should just be nature, there's the other perspective, a Christian perspective, that man should subdue the earth and that we should protect the houses and the lives, the livelihoods and the homes and businesses of families and Americans first, as opposed to, you know, engaging in these kinds of practices that are ultimately very dangerous. For too long, you know, you had this underbrush in California that needed to be cleared, needed to be dealt with, needed to be handled. That's just one aspect of this, but, you know, to hear people turn on the, you know, from offices in New York and studios in New York and D.C. and turn this into some kind of commentary about climate, when this is a local issue that could have been prevented, I think it's really inappropriate and wrong. The performance of Karen Bass in this moment is really astonishing. I mean, I know that she was considered to be one of the potential VP picks back in the day by Joe Biden, and a lot of people thought that she would have been a smarter choice than Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris has her many, many, many faults, but this is such a terrible performance on Bass's part. You know, it's astonishing to think that she was ever at the top ranks of Democrats who could have been vying for that job. And I think, you know, you get the perspective now of the difference between having local officials who will take responsibility and commit themselves to solving problems immediately and diving back into it versus people who just want to demagogue. I had, of course, the comparison, and I immediately texted a Texas friend of mine, you know, pour one out for Ted Cruz in this moment, because Ted obviously was someone who was lambasted, including by Karen Bass at the time, for taking his family to go to Cancun during the ice storms that Texas was experiencing. But Ted's a U.S. Senator. He is not in the line of command on any of the things having to do with fixing that ice storm. Gavin Newsom and Karen Bass are directly in the line of command. And the fact that they seem to be both so incompetent, so flippant and dismissive, so unwilling to answer questions, and, you know, basically trying to blame shift in this moment is a total indictment of their capacity to be an executive.
Ben, I got to ask you for your guess. You're a young man with a young family. Do you think you will see the Pacific Palisades rebuilt in your lifetime?
You know, I think so, Hugh, only because I have optimism about the capacity of Americans to come back from things. I've experienced it too often to think otherwise. But I'll tell you, I don't think California has put themselves in a position to make that an easy job. And it may be a thing where we'll test the limits of my lifetime in order to see that happen. My wife lived in L.A., you know, near a lot of this, and she has a lot of friends who were near a lot of this many years ago before I met her. And, you know, so many places and so many people were affected by this that she knows personally. And it's just a tragedy. It's a horrible tragedy, and one that it could have been avoided. And, you know, the attitude that I would have at this moment is saying, you know, if you want to see the Pacific Palisades rebuilt, if you want to see something change, if you want to make sure that this never happens again, then you as Californians need to seize the fact that you have the ability to make your voices heard in this moment and change the course, change direction. And that's going to require, you know, and you know this much better than I do, sweeping away a lot of the regulatory decisions, a lot of the government decisions that have been made over the course of this dominant Democratic Party within the state for so many years. They have gotten away with this for so long, and then you deal with the consequences of it, and then maybe change happens. We see it in New York with their crime situation, where, you know, people wake up to reality and they say, this didn't work, we're going to change course. You saw it obviously with many of these Soros prosecutors who were swept away in November, thankfully, after years of an experiment that only damaged people's lives. And that's something that I think is an opportunity to happen right now, but it's going to take Californians doing it themselves in order to achieve it. There's nobody that's going to be able to come from outside top down and just sweep all these different decisions away in an instant.
Now, one of the smartest guys I know sent me a text after I spent the last hour detailing, just cursory detailing, sort of like the first time I sit down with a client who wanted to build 4 houses on 2 acres. And I explained to him, okay, we got the local government in the city of LA. It's a nightmare to begin with. But then we're going to have to go to the Regional Water Quality Control Board. We're going to have to make sure that the Air Quality Management District's on board. We've got to talk with the California Department of Fish and Game. We have to make sure that the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, the Army Corps of Engineers, and the United States EPA did not have an objection to anything that you propose to do, and they always do. So I would always begin by setting expectations. I'm trying to set this guy wrote me, he said, I couldn't agree more. They have no idea, talking about the Pacific Palisades people who, the poor bastards, are in the, can I say that? If I can't, blank that out. They're in the coastal zone, which means that the Coastal Commission, which is where you go to die as a permit, a new Manhattan project is needed to just get us out of our own way. The federal government has a role here. Do you think the Republicans will have the guts to actually take LA into receivership? Because that's what we need. There are 70,000 people living on the street. There are tens of thousands of people who have lost their homes. Nothing works. And the Olympics are coming here in 4 years. What do you think?
I think that Republicans should have that kind of courage, but I'm not sure that they will because of the blowback necessary. And one of the things, though, that I think that they need to keep in mind is that inevitable blowback comes in the context that the fact that they have a majority is due in part to their overperformance in the state of California. And so there's an opportunity here to actually earn that, to say that there's a need here in this state that has, while it is written off now on a presidential scale, while it is written off as something that Republicans can win statewide, has actually provided the margin for their majority, their slim majority in the House, in a very key way, thanks to recruits, thanks to the way that they've been able to win some of these narrow districts. And that's something that I think they should pay attention to, because if they don't live up to that, then there's lessons to take away from it too. And those lessons could be the difference in terms of whether they're able to expand and actually have a foothold again in California politically and not. And so from my perspective, it's an act of courage, but it's also in their own interests to provide leadership in this moment that shows the alternative, that shows that they're willing to make these hard choices that Democrats have been completely unwilling to make because of their beholden nature to different interests and to the far left.
I'm talking with Ben Domenech. He is the editor-at-large for The Spectator. He is also a Fox News contributor, and you can listen to his podcast and just go to Apple, iTunes, Spotify, anywhere you find your podcast, listen to Ben's podcast. During the break, I'm going to ask him this question. I'm going to set it up so that you know what's coming, and then I'll play the tape of it afterwards. Blue governance has failed comprehensively in the city of New York, where people are not safe, in the city of Chicago, where they're not only not safe, they can't get an education because the schools have utterly collapsed, and throughout the state of California in ways large and small, but the largest way, of course, is the failure of the ability to have the water in the fire hydrants in the Palisades, or the resources available on the ground, or a mayor who is present, or a governor who can answer. A comprehensive failure of the Blue Project, the Progressive Project, wherever it is. Does that sink in, is my question for Ben Domenech. Do people who sit in the middle of this country, and maybe liberals, and maybe people who are social liberals, and all of the Hollywood stars, all of them who have lost their homes, for whom I feel genuine sympathy because they have just lost everything, do they understand it didn't have to happen and it doesn't have to be that way? Ben, you heard the setup. Will it change anything? Will the failure of the Blue Project in New York, Chicago, and California change minds?
I do think it will change minds. I don't know if it will change what actually happens in the areas, and the reason being that in some cases I think that things are so bad that people who have taken the lessons away from it will leave and won't come back. The people who have already lost everything in California, do they stay there? Do they try to rebuild? Or do they say, you know what, this is just the final lesson, this is the final straw, I'm going to go and move with all my friends who moved to Austin over the course of the past several years and I'm just going to do that instead. I saw video of multiple people who are are prominent comedians and actors, talking about the losses that they've experienced, and it's like, well, do you want to keep living there? Do you want to try to come back and do everything that's hard related to that, or do you view this as being, this is the last straw, I'm getting out? And I think that is a little bit different than what's going on in New York. I think people there are determined to turn things around, that they really have a lot of local pride, obviously, and they are less likely, I think, to leave the city, and they're going to continue to fight for it. And I think that the lessons taken away, especially from how awful public transit and the subway system, everything that's related to that has turned into, I think that they are, it's been so clear that the future for New York, I think, is actually a bit brighter because of the lessons. In Chicago, the level of corruption, the level of political dominance from the left, has been such a firm grip. I'm just not sure that there's going to be, an alternative approach that's going to work there, because the political machine is simply too powerful. And so I think it's a little bit, uneven. But one thing that should be important in this moment is for all the Republicans who said and advocated over the last, decade plus, many of whom I know, many including at the Manhattan Institute, Reinhard Salam and the people who've been leading over there, Raphael Manuel, who's one of their best experts on crime in the city. They've been hammering away at the idea Republicans, should not abandon these city issues. They should lean into them, because it's not just something that benefits them politically, but it's something that's important for the American people. And I think that that's the correct advice. I think that there's a place for conservative policy, for Republican policy, that pushes back against the anti-law and order language of the left. And it's important to do so and not just say, well, let them live with the consequences of what they've voted for. I
agree with that. I have a quick question, though. Rubber meet road time, 30 seconds, Ben. Washington, D.C., when I moved back in 2016, was vibrant and alive, and it had renewed. Mm. And in the course of 8 years, it's fallen into chaos in many respects. Should home rule be repealed if we care about our nation's capital?
I'm completely in favor of repealing home rule. It's the worst case scenario of both a deeply corrupt and deeply incompetent government, and there's never any consequence for it. I think that the Congress should reassert its control over that area, and I don't care about the arguments of people on the other side. It's been an abject failure, and very clearly is not going to reverse itself without a major change.
I hope people are listening inside the Beltway this morning from our Republican colleagues, because if they had stones, they would do not only that, they would temporarily, if not completely, repeal the Endangered Species Act, the applicable parts of the Clean Water Act, the parts of NEPA and CEQA. They would put Southern California into receivership. They could do a lot. They could make a statement. We'll see whether or not they do. Ben Domenech, thank you. I know you're fighting a cold. I appreciate the time this morning. Follow him on X at @BDomenech, and do listen to his podcast, The Ben Domenech Show. The poet laureate of the Hugh Hewitt Show for the last time on a Friday morning. We move to Friday afternoons next weekend. Hello, Joe.
I'm ready to sleep in. Thank you so much, Hugh. First of all, I really have to thank the tireless work of the firefighters, the pilots, the linemen, the electric linemen here in Los Angeles who are trying to save the city, and also to my clients from around the country who saw Tarzana pop up on a map on their news and reached out and asked if I was doing okay, and I'm doing okay, and thank you very much. I'd like to leave Los Angeles. I think it would be fun to. The problem at the moment is there is no place to run to. The storm and conflagration have really got the best of me. There's fire to the north of me, the south and east and west of me. The team that runs this city don't really seem to care. They tell me to evacuate, but they can't tell me where. Elon's dropping Starlinks, and I'll put one in my pocket, but I don't need a satellite. I really need a rocket. For years, I thought I'd sell my house and try to move away. But if I make it through this, then I'm glad I got to stay. It's time for rolling up our sleeves to help our friends and neighbors, a challenge that will clearly be like Hercules' labors. Voting out incompetence, oh Lord, it's such a pity. Their lack of preparation could just destroy a city. So pray for us, America. It's going to be a fight. But for the sake of everyone, we'd better get it right. That's Shouting Fire in a Crowded City by Tarzana Joe.
Well named, well said, well written. Joe, I have been watching. I have not seen Tarzana threatened yet. Is it actually in the path of the Palisades fire?
No, we're far away, but I tell you, we had the worst wind I've ever experienced here in 30 years. Power lines down and popping, which is I was without power for a while, and when you're without power and you can't get the news, I have a battery radio, and where's the next fire? Where's the next spot? You have your bug out bag ready. My passport, and the collected works of Tarzana Joe. To have to somebody to read while you're running. It's frightening. It's probably the most frightened I've ever been in the 30 years here, and we've gone through earthquakes and other fires, and the smoke is pretty bad. When the wind dies down, then all the stuff drops out of the air and on top of you. It's strange.
I don't think people quite understand yet. They will by the end of the weekend because the helicopters will get more coverage. The devastation. I haven't seen anything like Tuesday night. I told my audience that yesterday. Tuesday night was the worst night, and I moved here in 1978. I don't know when you got here, Joe. The worst Santa Ana winds, but they were predicted. This is what has made me so short-tempered with people saying, well, there's nobody to blame. Yeah, there is. There's a lot of people to blame, and I don't think we're going to wait very long to start that. Do you?
Well, there's going to be a shock, and then the time to do the work of cleaning things up. But then we can't just move on. We can't. This is not a time for moving on. It's a time for fixing.
Well, if you are Rick Caruso and you're listening, get that gubernatorial campaign going because, boy, does California need some help. Tarzana Joe at Reagan.com is where you go to get words of hope and encouragement, even when it's a cataclysm behind you. Tarzana Joe at Reagan.com. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Hugh.
And Joe is moving with us to the afternoon. So Fridays, we'll still have our poem of the week from the poet laureate of the Hugh Hewitt Show. You can write to him at Tarzana Joe at Reagan.com for all of your poetry needs. And the Hillsdale Dialogue's moving with us, coming up next hour as well. We're going to take a break from fire coverage. I do want to check the markets yesterday. Again, markets are in a strange kind of limbo. It's brought to you by our friends at AmericanFederal.com, 1-800-221-7694, 1-800-221-7694. Apparently, the world bought more gold yesterday because gold crested over $2,700, which had not been for months. $2,705 an ounce for gold yesterday. That does not include a commission, whether you are buying or selling gold. You should be doing it with our friend Nick Rovich and his team at American Federal. Again, their phone number is 1-800-221-7694. Nick and his team have been at this for 40 years. I begged them to become my sponsor. There are a lot of people who sell and buy gold in America because a lot of Americans and a lot of people around the world want to own some gold as part of diversifying their wealth because gold doesn't melt. Even when the fire takes your house, and gold can't collapse. It's just a hedge against disaster, and people should have between 5 and 10% of their wealth in dirt and gold, but that dirt can burn down. Gold doesn't. So over 100 years, gold has more than kept pace with inflation. That's why a lot of people buy gold on a regular basis, whether it's annually, quarterly, monthly. If you're going to do that with Nick and his team so you know you're getting fair, honest treatment from a very experienced, very forthright guy. Sat down with Nick probably a year ago when we made the agreement that he would become a sponsor of the program. And I am here to tell you what a wonderful guy. 1-800-221-7694. And I don't know what the markets are going to do. There is this extraordinary economic impact from this fire. And I've seen estimates from the low of 50 billion to a high of 150 billion. And that's actually not accurate. That's sort of the casualty loss, the opportunity cost, the cost in people's lives, the cost of rebuilding that which doesn't get rebuilt unless you have a campaign to do a capital campaign, churches, schools, so much destroyed that it's going to take a long time to figure out the cost. I have been primarily talking to people like Ben Domenech. I'd love to hear from you. Open up the phones, Harley. Maybe someone's awake. There are a lot of people who've been awake a lot of nights for the last week because they can't get a fix on the winds, and they never can. We knew that there was a red flag warning, and we knew on Monday that Monday night and Tuesday night were going to be bad. The red flag said maybe 100 miles an hour. Then you take notice, hurricane force winds, even though it's not the fire season. Typically, we've had a little bit of rain. This is a longer fire season because we've had no rain. And we have a lot of underbrush because we had a vast volume of rain in California last year, most rain of my lifetime. So, of course, there were going to be a huge growth in the coastal sage scrub in every part of California, and there ought to have been, commensurate with that, a coastal sage scrub clearing operation, an underbrush clearing operation, a standing up of extra resource. There wasn't. Karen Bass cut the fire department by $17 million. Gavin Newsom vetoed a bill to expand the fire brigade serving into January and February. All sorts of stuff like that happened. There are so many people to blame, not necessary to do it this weekend. I'm just asking my friends in media, if you don't know what you're talking about, don't pretend. I heard there are a bunch of feds who are rushing out here to take their photograph next to burned out lands and express sympathy. Don't do that. I saw someone from FEMA out here talking about fuel load. That's like a code word for we didn't mow the lawn. Fuel load. And they have no idea what the California Coastal Commission has done. They have no idea what the Regional Water Quality Control Boards are done, of what the Region 9 of EPA has done. They have no idea what the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the California Department of Fish and Game have done to the ability of people to protect their property. Their property. And they have no idea of the many, many obstacles that stand between even beginning to clean up. All right, wait, just give it a chance. There are a million bureaucrats waiting to tell people that they cannot do this or that in the effort to restore their lives. I do think it's going to change Los Angeles. It may change California. Not politically. It's not a conservative state. It's not Florida. It could be Florida. People could make those choices, but I don't think they're going to make those choices. Let me talk to Steve in Detroit, because Detroit is a blue city that is suffering from progressive mismanagement for decades and decades. Steve, what do you think?
What do I think? I think you're right. We're not thinking when it comes to football, but being a Lions fan since I was a kid in the early 60s, I knew somebody that watched the game the other night, and they were in their bedroom because they're always afraid of collapse. But other than that, these Democrat cities, going back to Portland, Seattle, Minneapolis, they hurt their constituents, people that vote these bums into office, and they're doing it again. And I look at this leadership, and I say, Judas Priest, who would go into battle with these folks? But the constituents, regardless who they are, they're being hurt, and that ain't right. They're Americans. They might be misguided on some political stuff, but doggone it, you got to feel for these people, no matter what they are. And everybody from the gov on down who's going to want to run for president, they ought to bring this up and say, yeah, you let your state burn. But it's terrible what they do, Hugh,
Yeah, and I'm glad you said, I don't care about people's politics when they've lost everything and they're this miserable. I care about getting the message out that everyone has got to get out of their way. And I would love to see the Republican Congress attached to the one big beautiful bill, receivership for LA. I cannot believe they're going to spend all this money on Olympics. They're going to build everything, right? They've got LAX has been under construction for 5 years since the Olympics decided to come here. It's a mess, and they're building things all over Southern California. The Palisades will get none of that. I mean, we really ought to consider canceling the Olympics in LA. It is that bad. I know we won't, but we ought to consider it. Thank you, Steve. Norma in San Diego. Your insurance was canceled, Norma?
Yeah, it will be April 25th of 2025, and I found out that the California Fair Plan might be my only option if I don't get picked. I went to USAA, and because I had 3 claims on my house in 5 years, which were minimal claims, they're dropping me for that reason. But I also think it's because of the fires, because I live in East County of San Diego.
Well, San Diego is going to get hit too. San Diego's
Yeah.
Board of Supervisors is as incompetent as the everyone involved in the governance of L.A. They've gone left,
Right.
left, 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 and they won't clear stuff. And there is going to be a major fire there. So I would not be surprised if your insurance company, USAA is pretty good. I'm surprised by that.
Well, yeah, they are, but I have to have a home inspection, so they're going to come out next Saturday, and if the underwriters accept it, then I will only pay $2,012 a year. But if they don't accept it, I have to go into the California Fair Plan, which will double my premium right now. It's $1,572. It'll be $3,000.
And it's broke. It's not going to, that's not going to help you because California doesn't know, they can't do anything well. They have this fair plan because so many people are pulling out of the state because they've run it into the ground, and it doesn't work. It's out of money. It will not survive this. So goodness, whatever they want to charge you, pay it. For as long as I've been on the radio, since 1990, I've had a caller occasionally, Mark in Mid-Wilshire. Mark is one of the creatives of Hollywood, so many of them. And Mark would call on the back line. And I go back in the radio business to 1990. I've been on Salem for 25 years, but I've been on the radio for 35. And Mark's sister is Nina. And Nina lost her home in the Palisades, and she called us on the back line. Hello, Nina. Welcome to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Good morning, Hugh. How are you?
I'm good. I am very sorry for what has happened to you. Would you tell people about your home, how you're feeling when you knew it was gone, and how long you had lived there? All that, many things.
Well, I moved to Pacific Palisades in the 1980s to go to law school, and my husband and I moved to we moved to Los Angeles. We moved to Pacific Palisades in 2000 when we got married. My husband grew up in Brentwood. He went to Pali High. His very closest friend is Judge Stephen Larson, who I'm sure you know very well.
My old law partner, you bet.
He happens to be the godfather to our oldest daughter.
Good godfather.
He's a good godfather, and we bought a house on Hartsel Street in the Alphabet Streets in Pacific Palisades, and we've lived there since April of 2000. On Tuesday afternoon, my daughter was at school out in the valley. I had dropped my car off to get some work done on it and was in a loaner on the way back, and I got the first evacuation notice from Calvary Christian School, where my son, who is 9, is a student. For those not familiar, it's the base of Palisades Drive when it intersects Sunset Boulevard, just at the bottom of the hill where the fire started. So driving back, the gridlock got stronger, just got more aggressive. And we, trying to get into Palisades was difficult. Had a friend pick up my son, and then I couldn't make it to the school even to meet her. So she took the son to her home, which is in the Marquez area of the Palisades. I drove to my house, packed bags, and my husband said he was going to come back home from downtown. I said, don't bother, you won't be able to get in. And drove to a place in Westwood that we'd secured to stay.
What are you going to do, Nina? I mean, it's gone,
Well,
and I'm very grieved for you. You're coping amazingly well, but what are you going to do?
Well, first of all, I'm in contact with amazing groups of people, including a group of Motley moms who have all, been here fighting for California for years. We're, at this point, we're insured, although State Farm was going to cancel our insurance in April, but they haven't yet.
Okay.
But, one thing the politicians can't take away from us is 72 and sunny and no bugs. Where, the Palisades is a mile and a half from the Pacific Ocean. It's one of 5 Mediterranean climates in the world. And a lot of us are committed to this area. And,
Do you worry about the Coastal Commission, the City of Los Angeles, the alphabet agencies I've been talking about? Do you think they'll let you rebuild?
Yes, I worry about those agencies, but I don't worry as much about them not letting us rebuild for a couple of reasons. Number one, Rick Caruso has invested a huge amount of money in the community. And as far as I know, his property is still standing, a block and a half from where my house was located. He also has a family that have also invested in it. That's number one. Number two, the Pacific Palisades is a little peninsula of the city of Los Angeles that is one of the highest tax revenue generating pieces of land that they have. If you realize Santa Monica is a separate city to the south, Malibu is a separate city to the north, and Palisades is that little piece of LA, LA City, where they get a huge percentage of their tax revenue. That's going to drop through the ground unless they make a significant investment in infrastructure. And now they have the opportunity to do so. They can put the power lines underground. They can make the streets, they can lay out the streets and fix the sidewalks and the curbs. And the amount of money, the amount of insurance money that's here for most of the people is enough for them to rebuild their individual homes if the city commits. Plus, we have a great city councilwoman, Tracy Park. She is a Democrat, but a very moderate Democrat, who I've worked with personally. I am a Trump Republican, as is my husband, and we have a lot of faith.
Nina, thank you for calling today. You are upbeat. You're an upbeat voice in a very grim week. It's a great way. I'm going to move to the Hillsdale Dialogue next, but I want to thank you. Please keep me updated next week in the afternoons. I'll be on in L.A. from at least 1 to 3 beginning Monday, and I hope you will call us on the back line and update us on what is going on as you try and recover, and you and all your neighbors in Pasadena, in Sylmar and Altadena. We are all praying for you this weekend.